Welcome to another edition of the Weekly Polls, where I talk about what I picked up this week, what's worth reading, what you should catch in the trades, and what should never ever be read or thought of again for as long as we both shall live. Hey, I only bought 12 books this week. Maybe I could have some food too. When my stomach mulls over that surprising turn of events, let's talk comics. Starting with the DC stuff, we've got Justice League number 3. Well, would you have a look at this? An issue of this book that was actually worth reading. Still not sure it's worth buying though, especially since it costs $1 more than most of the DC 52 books. We're finally introduced to Wonder Woman. Both she and Aquaman get exciting introductions in an issue which is mostly a big fight scene. That isn't exactly bad, but as has been pointed out, it's kind of weird how Wendy seems like she's always spoiling for a fight. That's not the Diana I've come to know. Fortunately, the story of Victor's turn to becoming Cyborg breaks things up nicely, and seems like it could be genuinely interesting. Here's my biggest concern. What happens when the fighting stops? I mean, I get that there'll always be danger, but at some point we need to see how these characters interact beyond whether or not they can kick ass together. That's where this book is lacking, I think. Jim Lee's art was a little better this issue, but that's still only for the splash pages. His panel-to-panel stuff is still sloppy, and I'm worried he's only going to flag more with time. If you don't have the time or energy to draw the flagship title, Jim, then don't do it. I'd recommend waiting until the trade comes out for this book. It's not terribly engaging from month to month. Batman number 3. Scott Snyder is churning out one of the most cinematic-feeling Batman stories in the character's history. This Order of Owls that's as old as Gotham is intriguing, and you can tell that Bruce sees them as a real threat. It's also a nice touch that owls are a natural predator to bats. I don't want to ruin the story, but suffice to say, it links back with Bruce's family, and we discover that the enemy is right under Batman's nose all along, and the reveal is absolutely stellar. Once these Dark Knight movies are over, I think someone should really pitch this story for the next Bat flick, because it would translate brilliantly to film. This is a must-buy. Pick it up. Nightwing number 3. What sells Dick Grayson as a compelling hero in this story is that he's full of self-doubt, but not so much that he's incapable of action. This issue is all about Dick coming to terms with the death of Mr. Haley, and the part he seems to have played in that. He's in charge of Haley's circus now, but he really doesn't know how to feel about that either. The other nice thing is that there are so many other characters here for Dick to interact with. Some who embrace him, others who don't. He faces off against an enemy called Feedback that forces Dick to face all his own feelings of inadequacy and failure, which works really nicely with the story. Bottom line, there are well fleshed out characters here, a solid story, and an intriguing ongoing mystery. Definitely pick this one up. Wonder Woman number 3. Look, personally, I haven't been satisfied with the run of Wonder Woman since Greg Rucka was on the book many moons ago. I had high hopes that Brian Azzarello had a story worth telling, but so far, he doesn't. Altering Wendy's story so that her father is now Zeus doesn't add to her character. It doesn't create any more drama between her and the gods that didn't already exist, which makes this change to her history needless. What's more, the Amazons are coming off way more violent, also for no particular reason. This issue doesn't really explain why Hippolyta would sleep with Zeus, and using Hera's anger as an excuse for why this secret has been kept for so long is just plain unbelievable for me. Cliff's art is very good, but it's the only thing worthwhile in the book right now. And that's a real shame. I love Wonder Woman, but for me, this just isn't her. I'm dropping this one and I recommend you do the same. Birds of Prey number 3. Okay. So you know how I said that Nightwing has engaging characters and a solid mystery? Birds of Prey is so close to being there, but it just doesn't quite make it. The problem is that everything that's happening is very surface. The idea that there's something inside of people's heads that can cause them to literally explode, it's menacing, but there just isn't anyone to care about yet. Poison Ivy joining the team adds some fun conflict, but that's about as far as it gets. Starling, Katana, and Canary, they lack depth of character at this point, and because of that, the team doesn't feel very, well, team-like. There's a nice twist in the final pages that kept me a little interested, but I'm recommending you drop this book. If anything improves, I'll let you know. Supergirl number 3. Most of this issue is wasted on establishing Simon Tycho as basically being Lex Luthor light. We get it. He's rich, he's powerful, he's morally ambiguous at best. We could have established that in half the pages it wound up taking. Instead, Kara's relegated to crying and fighting and, well, not much else. Pacing is a huge issue with this book and has been from issue number 1. It's taking forever to get anywhere. I'm pot committed to see this through until the end of the first arc, but I'd recommend dropping it if you're not into throwing money on the street. Catwoman number 3. Are you ready to have your mind blown? Because this issue was good. No, really. Finally, we're shifting away from this sexy Batman time and Selina's boobs flopping around to some real meat and potato stuff. We've got fights, we got drama, we're dealing with real consequences and real death, and it is about damn time. Batman does resurface briefly at the end, but in a way that makes much more sense than his previous appearances. So pay attention, Judd Winnick. This issue made me want to keep reading. Make this the standard and leave the oversexed nonsense to the side. Even if a reader doesn't necessarily like this broodier Catwoman, at least we'll all have something to talk about other than her body. And let's get more fun villains like Bone in here too. His villain speech to a tied-up Catwoman was the perfect blend of funny and threatening. If you've been reading Catwoman and were planning on dropping it, pick this one up before you decide. I was very pleasantly surprised. Moving away from DC, we've got Key of Z number 2. Is anyone else reading this book? More importantly, can anyone explain what's going on in this book? I feel like there's a really cool concept in here. One man fighting against the zombie horde in New York City while 3 different leaders all vie for control of the city and its outer boroughs. That's cool. Zombies in New York as a concept all on its own is cool. And our leading man, Ewing, he seems to have some Pied Piper powers over the undead with his harmonica, which, as a plot device, works surprisingly well. The problem is that the story is told out of sequence, and as a result, it's very hard to follow along. I'm going to keep reading it, but I'm not recommending it right now. It might be worth buying in the trades. I'll keep you posted. Who wants to hear about some number 1 random risk books? I've got 4 of them to go over this week. Maybe you'll buy one of them. Who knows? Let's start with Mudman number 1. Paul Grist opened this book talking about how he loves serialized comics and how he wanted to craft a book where you wouldn't want to wait for the trade. A story that's fun from month to month with a hero you can really love. Is Mudman that hero? Well, I'm not sold yet. I like the character. He's got a nice supporting cast with his friend, his sister, and his dad who seems to be in a little bit of trouble. But a hero made out of mud? An origin that has some mystery and possibly some history left to be told over the coming issues? It's all hovering around only decent so far. Really, I'm only willing to keep reading because, well, I'm a fan of Paul Grist, and I'm willing to give him more than 1 issue. If you're like me, pick it up, but otherwise, I can't say I really recommend it just yet. Check back with me next month and I'll let you know. Hawken number 1. Here's my problem with this book. It's a one-shot masquerading like a miniseries. This 1 issue is solid. It's got great dialogue, it's well drawn, I like the concept, but it's more like an episode of The Twilight Zone than it is an ongoing story for me. The gist is that Hawken is this old man who's done a lot of very bad things, and now he's got the ghosts of all the people he's killed sending him on missions of vengeance. Hawken doesn't really have much of a personality beyond being an old badass who takes no prisoners, so unless he's grown into a more complex character, I just don't see where the story goes. I'd certainly recommend checking out this 1 issue though, especially if you like gritty western stuff. Godzilla Legends number 1. You know, I was really excited when IDW got the license to use a lot of the Godzilla monsters, but I wound up losing interest in the first 2 books that they put out. And this third one, it didn't fare much better. It's Destroya versus Anguirus with some human drama mixed in. I don't know. The stakes didn't feel very high, and I didn't really care about any of the characters. Nothing really surprised me. Basically, unless you're Godzilla obsessed, I wouldn't bother. Seraph number 1. Something you should know about me. Any book where there's a dude on the cover with a giant glowing cross on his back has an uphill battle to climb in order to gain my interest. I only picked this up because it's part of Top Cow's pilot season, and I wanted to give all those books a fair shake. This one really didn't do it for me, though. There's a lot of fallen angel stuff, with one righteous man gone wrong being pitted against the evils of the world. At one point, he opines about the ills of society, the poor and the suffering, questions where God is when so many people suffer while the tiny few have more than they need. Maybe this is a flaw of mine, but all I could think was, boo frickin' who? I hope that's more due to the book's execution than my own inability to empathize with the rest of humanity. I'm blaming the book. It was generic and its plot wasn't to my taste at all. Skip it. So, of all the risk books, I'd say Mudman or Hawken are your best shots, depending on your taste. And that's all for this week. Thanks for watching, and keep reading.